They laughed when I walked out, thinking I was finished. But I wasn't leaving. I was collecting proof. One boardroom, one wrong screen share. And that's when the whole truth exploded. She stole my work, my credit, my name. So I turned her betrayal into my blueprint for power. My name is Camille. I'm 34 years old, and this is how I turned their betrayal into my blueprint for power. The boardroom smelled like new carpet glue and burnt espresso, that odd mix of ambition and exhaustion that clings to corporate mornings. Everyone carried it on their breath, in the stiffness of their collars, in the way they filled silence with forced laughter. The hum of the projector pulsed behind me, a mechanical heartbeat counting down to the start. The assistant VP kept clicking his pen again and again, a nervous metronome announcing that we were already 2 minutes late. I sat perfectly still. My folder rested on my lap, its edges aligned with the grain of the table. My spine stayed straight, my hands steady. Because I already knew how this morning would unfold, not in theory, but in fact. It wasn't my presentation. Not yet. The quarterly update belonged to her, the same woman who had spent 9 months teaching me the quiet language of corporate sabotage. Morgan. She was the kind of person who could make self-care sound like a competitive sport. Every strand of her hair obeyed her. Every word she spoke was measured for effect. When she passed in the hallway, the air behind her seemed to tighten, like even oxygen deferred to her authority. She called it professionalism. I called it performance. She had once copied 5 executives on an email just because I forgot to attach a file. 5. When I asked her why, she smiled with that gentle cruelty of someone who'd practiced it. I just believe in transparency, Camille. If you're confident in your work, it shouldn't matter who sees it. I had memorized that line. I repeated it to myself each night I stayed late fixing reports she had quietly undone. But today wasn't about what anyone saw. It was about how much truth could fit on one screen. The projector flickered, then bloomed into light. Morgan's slide deck appeared, bright, polished, full of borrowed brilliance. Then a faint sound slipped through the speakers, a soft male voice, low and easy. "Miss you already. You look so good today." A laugh followed, small, intimate, the kind that doesn't belong in a boardroom. For a second, everyone froze. The VP's coffee hovered mid-air. Even the air conditioning seemed to hesitate. On the screen, in the corner of her slides, a small video call window glowed live. Her camera was still on. Her mic was open. The voice belonged to someone outside the company. A client. The wrong kind of call at the worst possible time. Morgan lunged for the keyboard. Her hands trembled as she searched for the mute icon, as though she could erase what had already echoed. Through the room. "Technical difficulties," she stammered, her voice catching. I didn't move. I simply inhaled. The rhythm of the moment slowed until I could hear my pulse in my ears, because this wasn't luck. It was sequence, cause and consequence, finally arriving at the same intersection. "Since her screen is already up," I said evenly, "maybe we should continue with the evidence I mentioned last week." My voice landed like a gavel. The VP turned toward me. So did the regional director. The head of HR lifted her brows. The air thickened with expectation. I rose, unhurried, opened my folder, and slid a page across the table. The sound of paper on wood was louder than any accusation. "These are the IT access logs," I explained. "They show repeated late-night entries from Morgan's credentials on company systems, after billing hours, during weekends, connecting to the same client account shown on her screen." The VP leaned forward. The regional director adjusted his glasses. Morgan's face drained of color. "This isn't... Camille? I don't know what you're trying to..." "Page 2, I continued. "Contains Slack messages she deleted. I saved them before they were removed." No one spoke. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum more quietly. The third sheet detailed the deleted project directory, the one she had erased before last quarter's audit. For weeks, that missing data had been blamed on me. Today, the timestamps told the real story. "And finally," I said, laying down the last document, This is the original draft proposal. It's dated, signed under my credentials. It was later submitted under hers. The projector screen flickered again, still stuck on her desktop. The echo of the earlier compliment repeated faintly from the open call window, tinny and unavoidable. "You look so good today." I didn't meet her eyes. I looked at the VP instead. I'd like this entered into the record and forwarded to the ethics committee. The VP didn't hesitate. He nodded once. "Understood." Then he turned to Morgan. "You should step out." She stood slowly, gathering her laptop with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The chair scraped against the tile as she moved backward, her expression somewhere between disbelief and dawning clarity. When the door closed behind her, the room stayed silent for a long beat. Then the VP exhaled, the sound of a man realizing how close his company had come to collapse. "Camille," he said quietly, "how long have you known?" "Long enough," I answered. He nodded again. "We'll take it from here." But I wasn't finished, not with vengeance, but with truth. "I'd like to stay involved in the review," I said. "There are process vulnerabilities that made this possible. I can fix them." The head of HR looked at me differently then, the way someone studies a storm after it's passed. "We'll need your documentation," she said. "It's ready," I replied, and backed up off-site. For the first time in months, I felt the ground under my feet steady. The noise of the pen clicking stopped. The room smelled less of espresso and more of clean paper possibility. As I gathered my folder, I saw the reflection of the paused screen in the polished table. My own face, calm, composed, not triumphant, but certain. Outside the boardroom, the corridor buzzed with the ordinary sounds of the office. Phones ringing, printers whirring, lives going on. People would talk. They always did, but I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The evidence spoke better than I ever could. I walked out slowly, not because I wanted anyone to watch, but because I finally had nothing to rush for. The laughter behind me felt smaller than it had an hour ago, like an echo from another life. Power, I realized, wasn't the loudest voice in the room. It was the one that didn't need to raise itself. When I stepped into the elevator, the mirrored walls caught my reflection again, shoulders square, chin level, folder clutched not like armor, but like proof of endurance. Somewhere in the distance, the soft hum of the building merged with my own quiet heartbeat. They had tried to erase me with whispers and CCs and meetings scheduled without invites. They had mistaken patience for weakness. But patience, when paired with preparation, is strategy. And strategy, when executed at the right moment, is freedom. The elevator doors closed. The floor numbers ticked upward. Each one a small victory. I thought of every late night, every message unsent, every apology I had rehearsed but never spoken. None of it was wasted. It had all led here. When the doors opened again, sunlight spilled through the lobby glass, bright and unfiltered. The world beyond the office looked the same, but it wasn't. I had stepped out with everything that mattered intact: my integrity, my name, my proof. They laughed when I walked out, but they didn't understand. I wasn't leaving. I was beginning. The door clicked behind her, but the echo stayed in the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Every gaze shifted toward me, except for the projector, still flickering with that frozen desktop, the paused video call window glowing in the corner like an open secret refusing to fade. I didn't flinch. I stepped forward, the sound of my heels breaking the silence, and placed the next set of documents on the table, one sheet after another, careful, deliberate, like cards in a game I had learned to play too well. "These are the compiled logs from the last 6 months," I said, my voice even. "VPN sessions, deleted messages, server edits, all under her credentials. The metadata shows activity during weekends and holidays, periods the system should have been locked." The head of HR leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. The paper trembled slightly in her hand. "You had all of this already?" "I did," I said. But I waited. Silence lambs louder when it finally speaks. Something changed then. The air sharpened. The VP, who a moment ago seemed carved from doubt, now studied me with new eyes, calculating, focused, maybe even protective. His fingers tapped against the edge of his mug, no longer restless but precise, like he was counting consequences. But the truth hadn't been built in this moment. It had been layered, painfully, methodically, over months. Let me take you back. When Morgan first joined our team, I was the one asked to train her. She'd transferred from corporate in Atlanta, a move that came wrapped in glowing endorsements and impossible expectations. She arrived on a Thursday morning with designer heels that clicked like punctuation marks and a confidence that filled the doorway before she did. I remember offering her coffee. She declined politely, saying she only drank matcha, said caffeine made her too reactive. I should have known then. People who talk about composure that much usually spend their lives faking it. For weeks, she shadowed me. She laughed at my jokes, complimented my work, asked questions that sounded sincere but left small paper cuts in their tone. She knew how to make praise sound like a warning. The first real fracture came during the holiday rush. The office lights stayed on long past midnight that week, every cubicle glowing with the blue fatigue of overtime. I was building a projection model, months of quiet labor, and suddenly my access to the analytics folder vanished. It said it was a permission glitch, a formality. They fixed it the next day. 2 days later, Morgan presented that same projection to the leadership team. My formulas, my design, her logo on the title slide. She didn't flinch when I approached her afterward. She just smiled, slow and deliberate. "Next time," she said, "keep your work in your private drive. Just some advice." Then she walked away, heels steady, perfume trailing confidence. That moment didn't break me. It calibrated me. I stopped explaining myself. I started collecting proof. Not rumors, not gossip, receipts. Every Slack thread, every edit trail, every timestamp that didn't match, every client email that bypassed the usual chain. I archived them all, building a quiet fortress of documentation. Because truth without evidence is noise. Evidence turns it into structure. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but underestimated me, the way people often do when you stay quiet long enough. Then one afternoon, Jay from IT stopped by my desk, casual as ever, coffee in hand. "She's logging in on weekends," he said quietly, pulling files, renaming them with new timestamps. "Thought you should know." I didn't react, just thanked him and returned to my screen. But inside, the click of clarity was deafening. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was pattern. From then on, I waited, watched, documented. She grew bolder, blending manipulation with charm, folding herself into every client relationship she could find. She learned how to mirror people's ambitions, how to sound like the solution to every small insecurity. The strategy worked until it crossed a line. One afternoon, she left her workstation unlocked while she went to lunch. The monitor glowed with open messages, half a dozen conversations with a regional client. Married, influential. I didn't pry. The evidence spoke for itself. Her words were calculated, transactional. "He's a little too married," one message read, "but I'm a lot too valuable. He'll adjust." I didn't screenshot for revenge. I archived for integrity. Because the company's ethics code wasn't a suggestion. It was the backbone of every contract we signed. I realized then that Morgan wouldn't slip. She'd leap. And pride, I'd learned, doesn't come with a parachute. So I waited for gravity to do its job. And this morning, it did. Back in the boardroom, the silence felt electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. I cleared my throat, laid out one final sheet, a timeline, meticulous and color-coded. "If you cross-reference this with Section 3.4 of the Ethics Policy," I said, "you'll see 4 breaches: access abuse, conflict of interest, misattribution of work, and external communications without disclosure." The VP exhaled through his nose, a controlled release. He turned toward HR, his voice clipped but steady. "Get legal in here." While they made the call, I sat down. My work was done. Not because I wanted her downfall, but because accountability isn't optional. It's the price of trust. The projector still hummed softly, her desktop frozen in time. That tiny video call square glowed like an after-image of everything unspoken, ambition gone sideways, Choices turned into evidence. 10 minutes later, legal arrived, suits crisp, eyes scanning. They didn't ask much. The folder spoke for itself. HR ushered me into another room to record a statement. The questions were procedural, timestamps, access logs, confirmation of my documentation. When I returned, her seat was empty, her laptop still open, coffee still half full, lipstick fading on the rim. Her badge lay on the table like a surrender flag. The VP looked up from his notes. "Is someone finishing the quarterly presentation?" "I can," I said. "I built it. She just changed the font." Something eased in his posture like a knot untying. He nodded once. As I walked to the front of the room, I felt the smallest tremor in my hands. Not fear, not triumph, but release. For months, I had been invisible. Now, every eye in that room saw me clearly. The projector light was warm on my face. The data I had built filled the screen again, uncorrupted, mine. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. "Let's start with the Q1 performance overview." No one interrupted. No one doubted. The silence that followed wasn't uneasy. It was respect recalibrating itself around me. And for the first time in months, I felt something simple, weightless, powerful: belonging. I didn't change the slides. I didn't need to. Every number, every chart, every projection had already been built by my hands. She had only rearranged colors and replaced the name in the corner. As I advanced through each slide, I realized the room wasn't just looking at data anymore. They were looking at me. The silence between clicks of the remote felt heavier than any applause. My own voice sounded different to my ears, measured, calm, certain, as if months of being silenced had refined it into something unshakable. No theatrics, no smugness, just truth, translated into graphs and percentages, finally credited to the person who made them. When I reached the final slide, the room exhaled. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it lingered, deep and resonant, like a pulse under the skin. I felt it settle in my chest, replacing something brittle that had lived there for too long. It felt like breath returning. After the meeting, the VP caught me near the door. He looked toward the empty chair where Morgan had sat earlier, then back at me. His expression carried the weight of realization, the kind that doesn't need words. "I didn't know it was that deep," he said quietly. "It usually is," I replied. "That's why people like her think they can keep digging." He nodded, jaw tight. Then, after a pause, he said something that reached further than he probably intended. "You handled it the way real leaders do." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. No one had ever used that word for me before. Leader. I had been the dependable one, the fixer, the invisible current that kept everything running, but never the name on the glass door. Not when I stayed late patching other people's mistakes. Not when I hit deadlines others forgot. And certainly not when Morgan started rewriting the story around me. It hadn't started as sabotage. At least, not the kind you could see. It began with the smallest fractures, tiny shifts in tone, messages sent just late enough to cause confusion, tasks duplicated to create overlap. She'd email me instructions that contradicted our manager's direction, then sit back as I walked into meetings unprepared. When the plan fell apart, she would frown sympathetically and say, "It's just miscommunication. Happens to everyone." She was the queen of plausible deniability. Then came the corrections in public meetings. The numbers she'd twist slightly so I couldn't argue without seeming defensive. "Let's not get sidetracked on data," she'd say, smiling. People would nod because confidence often looks like competence from a distance. And bit by bit, I started wondering if I was the problem. If maybe I was too cautious, too precise, too much. There's a kind of erosion that doesn't show up on performance reports. It happens in small doses, behind compliments, inside polite laughter. It teaches you to doubt the way you take up space. "I love how detailed you are," she once told me. "It's just, sometimes it slows the team down." "You're great at support roles," she added later. "You don't need the spotlight to shine." She said it like kindness, but it felt like being placed in a box labeled useful, Not remarkable. The final twist came when she framed me as struggling with collaborative dynamics. I remember reading the phrasing in an internal memo, words so polished they almost sounded helpful. Almost. I was the problem, according to her narrative. The quiet one who didn't connect. The perfectionist who couldn't adapt. That week, I started parking behind the building where the lot met the line of pine trees and the world stopped smelling like toner. One afternoon, Jay from IT found me there. I didn't mean for him to. I'd been sitting in my car staring at the steering wheel, tears I hadn't planned leaking onto my sleeve. He knocked on the window gently. "You okay?" I wiped my face before opening the door. "Fine, just tired." He crouched beside the car door, looking up at me. "You don't cry like someone who's weak," he said softly. "You cry like someone who's been strong too long." The words hit harder than he probably meant them to. I didn't reply, just nodded, staring at the empty passenger seat beside me. The silence said more than I could. That was 4 months ago, and now the same people who had doubted my place here were calling me a leader. The irony was sharp, but not bitter. It just settled, like a truth finally acknowledged after years of pretending not to see it. That week, HR scheduled a compliance audit. Legal sent me a formal note of thanks, polite, procedural, but I could feel the pulse under the professionalism. The VP stopped by my desk and said, "We're recommending a compensation adjustment and title revision." He didn't need to say promotion. The air around the words carried it. The next morning, her desk was empty. A charger coiled on the surface, a coffee cup half drunk. Someone had left a sticky note that read, "Guess Karma uses Google Calendar now." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat at my desk and did what I always did, the work. Only this time there was space in front of me, no shadow standing between me and the light. That Friday, we had our first team meeting without her. The difference was immediate. The tension that used to hum beneath every agenda item was gone. People spoke freely, without checking facial cues or calculating responses. The room felt lighter, like someone had cracked a window that had been sealed for too long. Afterward, I went to the break room. The smell of coffee felt less bitter, more like ritual than survival. Sarah from marketing approached, her smile tentative but genuine. She placed a hand on my arm. "What you did in there," she said. "It was brave." "No," I answered, stirring cream into my coffee. "It was overdue." She nodded, eyes softening. Then, quieter, she added, "We all saw it. We just didn't think anyone could stop her." I met her gaze for a moment. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence. "I wasn't trying to stop her," I said finally. "I just stopped protecting her from consequences." She nodded again, like she understood. "Because there's a difference between retaliation and accountability. One burns the bridge, the other rebuilds it with truth." That afternoon, as I walked back to my desk, I caught my reflection in the glass wall outside the conference room. Same suit, same posture. But something had changed. My reflection didn't look smaller anymore. It looked aligned, like I had stepped back into my own frame. Leadership, I realized, isn't about title or applause. It's about endurance. It's about the quiet conviction to keep standing when the ground shakes, and to do it without shouting. When I sat down again, the cursor blinked on the next report draft. I smiled faintly. The work didn't look so heavy anymore. It looked like possibility.